Hello, everybody, and welcome to a live discussion of the Lonesome Dove read-along that we organized on the Fireside Discord recently. If you don't know, the Fireside Discord is an awesome, cozy little Discord server that is Joanna's and Josh's and mine, and we organize read-alongs occasionally. So we got actually quite a lot of people, not just the ones on screen, but quite a lot of people wanted to read A Lonesome Dove, which is sort of legendary for its length. It's a pretty damn big book, but it's also legendary, apparently, for its quality. A lot of people said they really, really liked it and enjoyed it, and that it was an awesome book. So we all read it together. And we're here today to, first of all, without too many spoilers or without spoilers, just discuss it in general terms, but maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, we'll then move on into spoiler territory. And I will put up a little warning on the screen so that people know. So we'll definitely give you warning. You don't have to leave now if you haven't read the book. First of all, I would like to go around and just get general impressions now that you finished the book. What did you think in general of it? And as Joanna very rightly pointed out just before we started, 6 people is quite a lot. So let's try and have microphone discipline. I will name people and we'll go around when we're trying to answer a question like this. So for me on the screen, to do a clockwise going around, that would be Britain. What did you think of the book? Again, staying out of spoiler territory to start with.
Yeah, I it's one of those books that a lot of people, I joke, I was like, it's one of those books like everyone and their grandma tells me to go read. And, I was like, okay, Lonesome Dove, let's see what you got. I wish I were kidding, but like maybe first like couple chapters I was in, I really enjoyed it a lot. You would think that a story about, I mean, it's about a lot more than this, but basically it's about this cattle run that these two best friends are going on. You would think, wow, that sounds really dry and boring, but it's really not. It's really it's a modern epic, I have to say. I really liked it a lot. It was my second 5-star of the year, so that should tell you something.
Okay, cool. Tori is next on my screen.
Yeah, so I watched the TV series, I want to say probably over a decade ago. So I remembered some of the major points of the story and the ending and all of that, but hadn't read the book. And I remembered being intrigued by the characters in the TV series. And so I wanted to jump on and read the book as well. Yeah, I honestly wasn't expecting it to be as much of a like epic grimdark western as it was. And I'm incredibly mixed on this book because I think the writing is really well done, and I'm such a character reader that the characterization that McMurtry pulls off in this, I think, is really, really brilliant. I just didn't like a lot of the characters and some of the story arcs that he chose to focus more on than others. So I'm incredibly mixed about this book.
Always good for a good discussion. So next on my screen is Darko.
Wow, similar to what Tori said, I'm very mixed on this book. I thought the characters were great. I thought the writing was phenomenal. I mean, Laurie McMurtry is a prose genius, in my opinion. But some of the depictions of particular groups, and I think some of the expressions of isms, which we'll get into later, I think made it a more difficult read than I was expecting. Aside from like the grimy and grim darkness of it. So overall, yeah, mixed. I like prose characters, wonderful, but other aspects of the book make it difficult to give it a 5-star, at least for me.
Fair enough. Joanna.
Yeah, I'm just appreciate being here for one. So thank you so much, Matt, for inviting me. And my past with this is a little similar to Tori's. I watched a little bit of the miniseries. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched some of the miniseries when I was a kid. My dad had read the book. Found out, by the way, that my dad used to herd cattle in northern Mexico on his ranch. So it was neat to have that connection there. This book, I thought was it was incredible. I thought it was incredible, and at the same time, I can totally understand why this would be an uncomfortable read for a lot of people, unless you're maybe like a white male. Like it's hard if you're it's difficult to read at times, considering the way of the world at the time or the way of society at that time. And at the same time, I feel as though the book is critiquing some of those things. I think that this could be seen. I know we talked in the Discord a little bit about how one of the themes that this is critiquing is masculinity, and I'm sure we'll get into this as we discuss this book some more. But it is difficult, I think, especially considering the conversations about Indigenous people, people of color. There's racism in this book. So I think that there's a lot to consider when it comes to that. But I will just echo what others have said so far, which is that this is an epic novel in scope, and the character writing is incredible, just unparalleled. And it was so intense for me. Now, as far as like the grim dark part of this, the funny thing about this is I was reading R. Scott Baker when it overlapped with me reading R. Scott Baker. And when I came to this book, at least in the first half of the book, I was thinking, wow, this is like really cozy. And then wow, it gets pretty graphic at times. So I'm excited to continue the discussion. So thanks.
Yeah, as far as themes, it's not surprising that a woman and a gay black man are the primary ones who had a problem with it, right up front,
I have to
And
admit,
let's before we comment, let's go to. Sorry, I started the commenting, my fault. But let's go get in Joseph's opinion.
I love the book. It's my new favorite Western of all time. It's replaced Blood Meridian as my favorite of all time.
Okay.
came out the same year.
I also I won't say I struggled with it, but I expected to maybe, just because I love Westerns and I've heard from like a million people, this is my favorite book of all time, this is my favorite Western of all time, whatever. I was kind of expecting to come out of it with like, hey, this is going to be at least my book of the year, or at least go on my book of the year list. The writing is amazing. I am not a woman, I'm not a black man, but I also was numerous times in the book just going, okay, this is hard. But it is amazingly written. I expected it to be a lot more about cows. Like I didn't know anything. Like I'd heard a million people say it's awesome, and I knew it was a Western, and that was about it. I'd never seen the show. I didn't do any research. I didn't want to know anything about it really. And I was like, wow, there's not a whole lot of cowboying in this, especially at the beginning. The beginning, like you said, Joanna, is almost cozy and is kind of slow, like not boring, but it's just characters being characters and not doing a whole lot. But the character writing is stunning. Like just 20 pages into it, I was like, I have a strong feeling for who all of these people are. I don't like all of them, but I have a very strong feeling for who they are and what they're about, It's really, really good. It's definitely really, really good, but it left me feeling kind of sad and bleak, which doesn't put a book super high on my list generally. That isn't something I take with me and love, unless it's Robin Hobb. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of contradicting that. But yeah, maybe again, not getting into details, so we're not getting too spoilery. And this one, I would just say anybody who wants to, but let's be clear and respectful of each other's microphone time. What would you say are some of the themes of the book? Because it's pretty theme heavy. Throw out a theme and let me know about it.
I guess I'll go because I'm a big theme. I'd probably say one of the themes you mentioned it earlier. It's masculinity. There's a lot of discussion on masculinity and what it means to be a man. I would also say another theme is unrequited love. Also regrets. I really it's also a lot about aging and just the regrets that come with aging. It feels a lot like the end of an age, even though like the 1870s was sort of the kind of apex of the American West as we know it. And a lot of it is, I'll try not to spoil things, but a lot of it is Cole and Gus kind of, on this drive, and they're kind of wondering where their lives have come to. They got each other, but they've done some things, and they've done some really regrettable things in the past. And they're kind of facing that as they kind of go on this journey, really.
Yep, absolutely.
Anyone can jump in if they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just echo that. There was a line I was going to try to find. If I can find it, I'll bring it up. Related to that idea about like what side they are on. I think that there was some really good discussion about that. Like I think at one point, Gus even says he makes a couple of statements at times trying to understand the Native Americans and their perspective and why they're fighting at certain times. I really appreciated, by the way, with the Native Americans, that they weren't all just lumped into one tribe, that there was actually distinctions between the tribes and understanding of that, even when it was really hard to understand the Native American perspective, given what happens to a certain character. But yes, or a couple of different characters, I should say. But I would agree with that. I think masculinity is a huge theme that comes up in this, and unrequited love as well. So I'll echo those two themes as well. And regret, I really like that too. I think one other theme that I thought of a lot was coming of age. Even though we're following Gus and Carl, older, more seasoned characters, we do have quite a few characters who are younger on this journey. And usually especially in epic fantasy, which we're all very well read in, I think, in this group, we're used to that coming of age journey, making men out of this epic adventure, and they're supposed to be independent and skilled and heroes at the end of the day. And I feel as though, well, I guess light spoiler here, but I feel as though that's not exactly how it works out at the end. So that was something that I took with me. As far as what you were saying, Matt, about your feelings at the end, I mean, well, I guess we could talk about this later on as well when it comes to spoilers, and it ties into that theme of masculinity. I did not like the last line of this book, and we had some good conversations about that in the Discord. But I thought it was one, it was abrupt, and two, it just did not sit well with me. And it made me sad because reading this book, it gave me so many different feelings that I loved, even though it was hard and bleak at times. There was a suspended feeling of longing that I felt throughout this book, a lot of longing. And I guess that's kind of tied into that unrequited love and regret and I don't know, just so many of the themes of this book. And for me, it was giving me vibes of East of Eden by John Steinbeck, which I read last year and I loved. But the thing about East of Eden is that when I finished that book, I felt suspended. I felt like, I'm suspended in this melancholy. And I was wanting that at the end. And in the end, I just felt, no, I didn't quite like that ending, but otherwise loved what this book was doing thematically. And I can understand it within the context of the themes.
I thought that the final sentence, I didn't like it, but I thought it was very appropriate to the book. Like it totally belongs in this book. You know, it didn't leave me feeling satisfied or happy, but that's a lot of this book. Like this is not a book about satisfying you or making you happy. You know, you were
Yeah.
about to talk to her.
Yeah, I was going to say another theme that I noticed pretty heavily in this book was leadership, because you've got like, you know, Call is the leader, but then you have, well, a lot of the men look up to Gus and how he leads in a very different way. You've got everybody, you know, as soon as they need to know where to go or what the weather is doing, Dietz is the, like, you know, the source for that. And then you've got people kind of looking up to some of the different, like, hands on the cattle drive as being, so there's kind of this really interesting hierarchy of leadership throughout the book, and it shifts depending on what's going on in the story, which I thought was very interesting.
I think at least a theme I don't think I've seen mentioned yet is choices, and how just one choice can completely derail your entire life. And you wonder what would have happened to the characters differently had they made a different choice, because a lot of them, this current circumstances or how they end up is based on just one decision that they made in their life, and then they have to face the consequences of that decision. So I think that was a pretty big theme throughout the book.
The two big themes that kept hitting me the whole time, and I mean, I guess this one, the first one, is kind of meta. It encompasses a number of ones that you've all mentioned, is like the separation between people, and that separation can't be bridged. You know, that felt like a real sort of strong message in the book. It's there are all sorts of people in the book who should just talk to each other, and they don't, or they don't the right way, or they don't say the right things, or they're holding back for some reason, and because of that, they're separated. They could be a much closer, either physically or distance or emotionally, but they're not, because they just won't bridge that gap, you know. And the other one that got me the whole time was the cost of progress. Like it's all about, in the characters, it's about primarily about two guys getting old and having a lot of stuff in their past that isn't that way anymore, and they can't be who they used to be, not just because they're old, but because the world has become more civilized, and that has a price. You know, there are a lot of things that are changing, and this is kind of what they're doing. Just the really basic story, they're driving cattle from Texas to Montana, is in a way them denying that. You know, they're going away from their past, they're going away from progress and civilization, and they're going to where things might be like they used to be. Of course they're not, because they never are, but it's kind of like them trying to recapture the old days, recapture their youth, recapture the uncivilized frontier of America, you know.
So
I just want to really quickly say that I love that you came up with that, Matt, because the title is Lonesome Dove. And even though that's the name of the town, there is this sense of loneliness, of aloneness.
If you've got a book with Lonesome in the title,
yeah, I'm
going to be thinking about why. You
exactly.
know, like I'm not just going to accept at the beginning, oh, okay, that's what the town's called, that's fine. It's like you've got an emotion in the title. Why is that? And pretty much, I had the feeling, even though a lot of the characters in the book are together with other people in different ways, everybody in the book is lonesome.
Yes.
Right? They're all isolated. They're all separated in 1,000 different ways, you know, and some of them don't even seem to be aware of that. So they don't try. And some characters are trying to connect, are trying to get together, or at least want more together with other people, more togetherness. But nobody really manages to bridge that gap and get what they want, you know? So Yeah. Joseph, what do you think, theme-wise?
I think one of my favorite themes is just the whole death of the West. Like the frontier is gone, and this time period is also like my favorite time period in history. And so this was just a joy to read, to see all these changes happening to these characters and where they're going and where they've been. So yeah, I think that's one of my favorite themes, is just the death of the frontier.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really, really well done, in that it wasn't just childish nostalgia for something that used to be good. It's like, no, a lot of things used to be a lot worse, you know, and challenging. I mean, I don't know if I'd call it a theme, but that was one of the other things I kept thinking throughout the book. All of this stuff is super dangerous and uncomfortable. Like, being away from anything civilized is going to kill you. You know, there's animals trying to kill you. The weather will even kill you. Everything is out to kill you, basically.
Even occasional water snake.
Yeah, I mean, everything they run into is like, oh, you could die now. You know,
and lightning.
Yeah,
because why not?
Yeah. So it wasn't just nostalgia for. I mean, there is some of that as well, like nostalgia for a purer landscape or less influence of men and civilization and all of that, but also that, you know, that has a price. You have crazy people running around killing people because they feel like it. And yeah, excellent stuff. It's a very rich book. No matter what you think of it, it's got a lot of richness. So I would say maybe we free ourselves up to talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Can I, Matt? Can I talk about how much I hate Jake Spoon now?
Actually, I wanted to go in a more positive direction, maybe with characters, to start with, and ask, who's your favorite character other than Gus?
Damn it!
Because Gus is too easy. You know, like everyone's going to say Gus.
But if not Gus, it would probably be Lorena, because I really felt sorry for her, and you know, I wanted to give her a hug. You know, I wanted to go into the pages and give her a hug and tell her she deserves better than these fucking idiots that she hangs out with. Not hangs out with. I don't think she wants to be there.
I think everybody wanted to give Lorena a hug. That was part of the problem.
She didn't want your hugs. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, they didn't want. They weren't going to give her a hug. I'll tell you that. Maybe Dish wanted to give her a hug.
Yeah.
It was.
Anybody else?
That's another theme I think would be interesting, like how women were treated back then, because that's explored a lot, particularly with Lorena.
Well, I mean, we sort of briefly mentioned it with especially Tori and Daka's reaction. Sexism and racism like are very harsh in this book. I mean, I think probably pretty realistic for the time period. Like no real surprise.
I mean, hey, I'm not, you know, I'm not black or woman, but I thought it'd be worse.
That was, and I'm interested to hear what you think of this doco specifically. I thought it was interesting that in a time where I think like violent, murderous racism was probably kind of the default, McMurtry, I think very consciously put together a group of guys who are going to be our characters who weren't like that. Mostly, you know, like most of the racism they run into is outside of that group. Like I felt like Dietz was basically accepted as one of the guys in the group, but also felt like a little bit of an outsider, maybe just because he was black, you know. But then the really, really hardcore, unpleasant racism is stuff they encounter along the way. It's like part of their challenges and difficulties along the way. What do you think, Docker?
No, I totally agree. But I think there was some racism among the guys because I can't remember who it was, but they were like afraid to talk to Deets because they were raised to not talk to black people.
Was
or
it
something. I
Dish?
can't remember. It must Dish. Okay, it was Dish.
Yeah, I
Dish
was mostly thinking of like
yeah.
Cole and Gus.
Yeah, Cole and Gus, yeah, they were
Yeah.
they were straight, they were cool. But yeah, the very kind of I guess when I went into this book, I've never read a Western, nor have I ever watched a Western. It's never really been my genre, so I didn't know what to expect. I was pretty much anticipating like, cowboys on a cattle run. That's what I heard about the book. Because no one had really expressed the racism here. And it's very, very difficult to read, especially when I can't even remember the character's name. He was going to be hung, and Dietz was asked to do it, and the way he just excoriated him and the words he used there, like I couldn't even read it anymore for the rest of the day because it made me feel very angry.
That was Dan Suggs, I think.
Yes, Dan Suggs.
Later part of the book, yeah.
Yeah, and it was upsetting
Who hung
because
got him
yeah.
in fire.
Yeah, and I just could not, I couldn't believe I couldn't believe that like racism was that heavy in the Midwest, I knew it was in like slave states, but I didn't know much about time that time nor that geographic location. So to know that no matter where you went, if you were black, you were still an N-word, and people would freely call you that or consider you that. It was just, to me, surprising. But it's a good thing to learn. Because the book to me was also a lesson in history for someone who knows nothing about that time period.
That scene happened.
Go ahead.
That scene happened up near Missouri, right? Because Missouri, that was one of the biggest issues leading up to the Civil War was Missouri was a slave state, and so that's why there's so much rampant racism there, even in the 1870s, getting right around the end of Reconstruction.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, but it also happened with some bandits, basically. I don't know where they were from, but they were like riding all over the place. I don't know if it was necessarily they were from Missouri and it was related to Missouri specifically or something, but they were just assholes from somewhere,
Yeah.
And that was definitely the most extreme example of it that I remember. But that was also kind of, Dan Suggs specifically, that character was like, he was an absolute psycho.
Totally. Yeah.
There was pretty much no way that you can imagine someone being a bad person that he wasn't.
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
Like, for fun, he hangs a guy and then shoots him after hanging him and then burns him after he's dead. It's like, dude, relax. It's over already, like, chill the fuck out. Yeah, actually, this is interesting. Terry says it's easier to not like several characters than it is to pick one favorite character. There are a lot of very unlikable people in this book.
I did feel very attached to Dietz, though. I really loved his passages about when he was looking at the moon, and I loved the fact that he was noted for being someone who observed and remembered details. He had a really good eye. And I have to say, just jumping towards the end, his death hit me harder than Gus's.
Yep.
Yeah, me too.
I got more emotional over that. And maybe part of it is because that was the one part of the miniseries that I remembered. I remembered Gus's death, and I remember it stayed with me all these years later. And I remember hauling the body and that whole journey, which was, I think, a lot longer in the miniseries than it was in this book. And I kept expecting that to happen earlier in the book, and it happened way later. But when Dietz died, that gutted me. Like, that was so painful. It was so tragic, like really tragic.
Brian once promised that someone will take his corpse to Texas.
See, normally I would jokingly agree, but I know that Brian would actually hold me to
He'd
it.
expect it. Yeah.
I would actually say Dietz is probably also my favorite character because his death was also the scene from the TV miniseries that also stuck with me the longest. And I think part of that is my favorite characters in fiction are always tragic heroes. And I feel like every time we got little sections of the book with Dietz, it was like a nature walk, and it was calm, and I felt like it was a breath of fresh air where we could just be like, okay. Like,
yes, I totally agree.
Like, and I think that little bit of isolation that Dietz has, even within the motley crew of main characters, I actually really was grateful for it, because when we were with Dietz, we were outside of all of the everything that was going on in the motley crew of cowhands. And I would say after him, I actually really appreciated Newt's perspective throughout the book. I liked Newt a lot because I think I appreciate characters that lend a contrast. And I think, we have these older men who are living with a life of regrets, and they're trying to rediscover something they've lost. And we have Newt who's just trying to figure out life in general. And he doesn't have like this long history of regrets yet. And I think he brought out different sides of the other characters, and also that theme of searching for who his father was through the whole story and all of that. I was very invested in his coming of age story quite a lot. But yeah, I would say those two were probably my favorites.
Just back to Dietz for a second. It occurred to me, it sort of surprised me. Like, I'd been reading about all of these guys for a while, and then it suddenly occurred to me, even though he's basically like the second-class citizen in the group, just because he's black and just because that's the way a lot of people treat black people, he was the only guy in the entire group, in the entire book, really, who I thought was kind of at peace with himself. I mean, that was what hit me so hard when he was gone.
Yeah.
Well, hold on, Matt. Except for the sign, he was not at peace about the sign.
I'm not saying nothing ever annoyed him. I'm saying in general, with life and the larger themes we're discussing, he was basically at peace with himself. He was good at his job. He wasn't constantly bitching and moaning about not having a woman or how things used to be, or like everybody else's constant problems. He just did his job pretty good and looked at the moon at night, and he wasn't like suffering all the time. I mean, he wasn't making himself suffer all the time, which is what pretty much everybody else is always doing. And that's I would also say Dietz was probably my favorite.
He wasn't as angsty. I was being silly there, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I think you're referring to the conversation that he had with Gus at one point, because Gus said, Dietz, don't you want anything? Don't you ever think about other things you could have? And Dietz was like, why? What
do I need?
Yeah.
I think I mentioned Dish as the one that was still kind of like racist a little bit towards Dietz, but I want to say it might have been P.I. actually, was it?
That's what I thought, P.I.
Yeah, because
what
I thought was cool about that, and it made me think of it because of Terry's comment, was that full circle of at the end when P.I. is trying to get back to the herd and he's like dying, and who is it in his head that shows up as like the guardian angel? And that kind of full circle of, I think, P.I. like, and the sad part about that is we often only recognize what we've lost when it's gone. But yeah, that just made me think of it. I also loved P.I. I'm not going to lie. Like, there were some great scenes with him.
My favorite character, actually, as much as I love Dietz, my favorite character aside from Gus is Clara.
I was going to say Clara too.
I was going to say her too.
Yeah,
Claire's
go
awesome.
ahead. You all can go ahead, and then I can respond if you want to.
No, go ahead. You started
Oh, okay.
it.
Yeah, I thought she just had an incredible amount of resilience and grit. I liked that she was a seasoned woman, and she's still one thing that will win my heart in books is when an author will portray a woman who's older and even give some physical descriptions of those signs of aging, but not in a negative way. Like it
Not
seemed like
make her ugly because she's old.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That she's still loved, that she's
Yeah.
still attractive to Gus, that she's still attractive to uh July, actually, even, and
Yeah.
he falls in love with her. But I loved her because she wasn't one note. You know what I mean? Like she was hardened by the grief that she's endured from losing her sons, from her husband being in the state he's in. She was hardened by life, and at the same time, she is she's just a very she's caring and loving, and you see all these sides of her. You see the part of her that's tough, but you see the part of her that's loving and that's relentlessly giving and opening her home to others. So I loved her interaction with the I cannot remember his name now, but the Mexican worker on her property, like how she gave him a jacket.
Oh yeah.
Was really nice. I'm Mexican American, so I actually did appreciate the way I thought that the Mexicans were actually portrayed in a nice way in this book. Yeah, I liked her relationship with her daughters. I loved how she was there for Lorena and how she took her in, and how I loved the conversations with her and Gus. I didn't think she was always right about everything, but I still thought there was a lot to her character that I just found so fascinating and so realistic, and she was somebody
Yeah.
just I greatly attached to.
One of the things I really like,
Absolutely.
Laura, is like you could perfectly see as when you meet her and when you get to know her, you realize like, oh, it's perfectly understandable why Gus would be obsessed with this woman. You know, she doesn't take anything from anybody, but she's
But
also
also pretty understanding. I thought why the two of them can't be together.
yeah, they're
Like
too
the
much.
two of them together would have been a train wreck.
Oh yeah, they're
Um,
like it would have been a disaster. But
yeah. But again, that was maybe one of the bits. I mean, that is the clearest regrets kind of relationship in the book. But for me, it was also the clearest loneliness and separation relationship in the book, because both of them were very attracted to each other, very close in an emotional way, kind of, but in some way fundamentally didn't get each other and
yeah,
couldn't accept each other.
I think Clara had more self control, and I would say more self awareness, but because Gus is pretty impulsive throughout the story. And I
Gus
think
is a romantic and Clara wasn't.
something's gonna go wrong.
That's what it was.
Yeah, she had a lot
For
of
me.
foresight though about things. She had a sense that if they had gotten together, he would be on the road again. That he wasn't going to stick around. I
Yeah.
think she was just more realistic.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
always saw ahead of things.
Absolutely. And Gus was totally a romantic. So he was like, love of my life, and wouldn't it be perfect if, and all that. And she was like, no, this is never going to work. Shut up.
My favorite.
I want to argue that I think even though Gus did have romantic notions, I think he always sensed she was right. Like I always got the sense that he
didn't fight about it. I mean, like he wasn't arguing much when she was like, this is what you're like and it's not going to work. And he was like, yeah, I get that.
You're right.
But I mean, he'd been riding around for I don't know how many years thinking this would have been the perfect woman in my life, and if only I can get back to her and all that, instead of giving it up at some point or understanding that, yeah, of course this would never work. He's still at his age, he's thinking I could go back and I can get this woman that I always should have had.
Yeah,
I think my favorite Clara part was when she brought forth Paul's faults and like called him out on everything and talked about like how hard-headed and set in his way he is, and how wrong he was to deny Newt. Because that's clearly your son, and no matter what, you just would not accept it or acknowledge it, at least publicly. And I appreciated her because no one else would, outside of Gus, of course, because he just didn't care. But no one else seemed to be able to call him out on his bullshit except Clara, and I loved like seeing that.
Everybody in the entire book is afraid of Cole.
They
except
seem, I
her.
mean, they don't.
Except
yeah,
her.
Clara,
Yeah.
You know, like
They're afraid.
Clara's the only one. She's like, no, fuck that shit. I have to tell him he's being a dick. You know.
Are
And,
they?
yeah, totally.
I don't know.
Nobody ever speaks straight words to Cole. Nobody. Not even Gus. Gus sort of, he's close to Cole, closer than anybody else. So he can go to him anytime and talk, but he still kind of dances around issues and never really pushes it and doesn't ever try and get Cole to admit anything.
How often do people say, "Hey, can you go ask? You need to go ask
Exactly.
all about this for me because I don't want to do that."
First of all, in almost the entire book, whatever's happening, Cole is there. He's not here. He's not with us. He's off by himself. And then, like you said, anybody wants something sorted with Cole, they go to Gus and tell Gus to go talk to him. Which also, I mean, how lonely is that? Like for Cole.
This must be because I was kind of going through book hangover with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. But there's a line in that book where in the prophecy it says, one will bury his heart in a dark wood and yet still feel its ache. And I'm like, that's Cole. That's who Cole is. He's so broken on some level by his decisions that he's made, but he just can't bring himself to confront it. But he still feels that pain. Sorry for the background noise, but he feels that pain, kind of afraid really of confronting that pain.
That's a good insight actually about Call, because I love, because on the one hand you can almost feel some sympathy for him based on that, but on the other hand it does lead him to make some decisions that do just make him an asshole, honestly. Like one, Newt, but also I love the conversation, even though we talked, I agree with you, Matt, that Gus kind of dances around Call. He kind of argues on the surface level with Call, but never really fully confronts him most of the time. But there were a couple of times he did. And I really love the one particular conversation that's coming to my mind right now, when he's talking about Newt's mom. And he's like, oh, he doesn't have a mom, she was a whore. And he's like, she had a name, like you need to acknowledge she had a name. And so it's like he almost tried to dehumanize this woman, and it just didn't sit well with me. I'm like, yeah, I get it. You're hurt, but you need to confront reality. And it's just, I just feel like it was distorting his sense of humanity in some ways.
Joanna, have you seen the East of Eden movie?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I was about to say, there's a line in that where James Dean, don't snicker, but there's a line where he goes, I don't remember it exactly, but he basically is like, you were too ashamed to admit that you, because or it was something, because Kathy Ames is a horrible human being, and he basically just says, like, you're just ashamed of me because you're ashamed that you ever loved her. And that's kind of how I feel about Call with Newt, because Cole is this very stoic, doesn't talk about his feelings usually, unless it's with Gus, maybe.
Not really. I mean, Cole never really talks about his feelings with anybody.
That's true. Yeah.
It's clear in the book, and I think it's clear to Gus, specifically about the Newt and his mother subject. It's clear to everybody what's going on. Nobody is surprised. Cole slept with a whore, thought he shouldn't have done it, thought it was like a moral failing on his part, and therefore ignored the consequences of it.
Mm.
Like that's all there is to it. It's a really simple situation, and everybody knows it. Like, it's not surprising, and Cole can't even admit it happened. You
I think
know,
James
the whole thing towards the end, like all the way through, Cole is in some ways kind of admirable. Like, he's tough and he's leading all these guys on this sort of epic adventure and whatever. But when it came down to it with Newt, Cole totally lost me. When it came down to it with Newt at the end, I was like, you are a coward. That's the core of who you really are. You're a coward. And you're acting like you're the opposite. And you want everyone to think you're the opposite, but you are a coward. You can't even say to this kid anything good. You can't say to him, I'm your dad, by the way. Even though everybody already knows. Like, you know, it's not a secret. But he just can't admit it.
Yeah. I'm sorry for my language, by the way. Just responding to Bell too.
You're my channel. My language is always going to be worse than yours.
I had to
Especially
pick you from you cussing earlier. So
yeah. No. It's always welcome on my channel. I don't have any problem with it. All of us, except one, are very outspoken people. So I wanted to give Joseph a chance, at least. Open some space for Joseph to talk a little.
I think the thing with Call is you see it when he obliterates that dude in that town, is that is what he is when he doesn't have the walls built up. And I think that in order to even admit that Newt is his son, those walls would have had to come down, and I'm pretty sure it would have ended up with him being dead shortly after from something. Like, he's just absolutely insane. The fact that he did that to that dude at the drop of a hat, and that like his rules and his system of being who he is the only thing that stops him from doing that. And I think that's one reason why Gus wouldn't confront him straight out about it.
You don't push Cole. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. I forgot about that for a minute. He is basically a psychopath.
He's Blue Duck, but with rules.
Like, he's Blue Duck trying to apply his murderous psychopath tendencies to the good side. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of Dexter, which I'm watching right now. So kind of
right.
If anybody who's ever watched Dexter, he had like a code, and that's what kept him on the right side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little about maybe the characters we didn't like so much.
Jake Spoon. I hate I hate that man. And don't get me wrong, guys. I've read about a lot of really depraved, disturbed people in my life. But I don't think anyone's driven me as crazy as Jake Spoon has.
I wouldn't call him depraved. He's just a narcissist.
You know, I wanted to hug Lorraine. I wanted to punch Jake in the face, in his stupid face.
I mean, there was some discussion on the Discord while we were reading. Put up your hand if Jake is your least favorite character.
No, it's not.
Well,
no. Yeah, a lot of. I mean, he's definitely extremely.
He's in the
unlikable.
list.
Yeah. And there's not a book that's short on unlikable characters by any means. Who was your least favorite character then, if not Jake?
Dan, maybe.
Well, yeah, I almost don't count Dan because he's just like, he's not really a character. He appears just to be a monster for 5 minutes, you know.
Blue Dog?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's a good one. I'm not a fan of July Johnson.
What is up with July Johnson?
He was such a wuss. I'm like, I don't.
July. Hey, he's not a bad guy. You got the rawest deal out of everybody.
But that's exactly the thing. I mean, I don't want to steal this from Darko, but for me, that was exactly the thing with July. He's not a bad guy. He's also not a good guy. He's not a guy. He almost doesn't exist. He's so passive, you know?
Yes, he is. And, and Clara, is trying her best, like, like be a man. You're gonna ask me you want me to marry you, but you're not even a man. What am I supposed to do with you? So, I don't, and then his first wife just treated him like a simp. It's just I felt sorry for him, but also I'm like, dude, what has to happen to you for you to finally step up and be a guy like Matt just said? I don't know.
Clara is what had to happen to him to get him to step up.
Yeah. Yeah, she was like, we're into the characters we don't like, but Clara was such a cool character.
Wasn't
She's
she
so good.
awesome?
Yeah.
Gosh,
She's
love
like one
her.
of the best women I've read.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, because she was like, everything you see of Clara is mean and sharp and hard and unpleasant, and yet she's the most caring person in the book.
Exactly.
She's like only taking care of people. Like as soon as we meet her, I was like, don't you have any pillows in the house that you could put over your husband's head? Like, I mean, this is a useless situation and you're just waiting. But she's caring, she's much nicer than I am.
And she knows there's no hope too. I mean,
Yeah.
like even when he dies, I think that I love that conversation. Her daughter's like, I feel bad that I wanted him to die. And she said, I did. It's okay. I did too.
Yeah. Yeah. But also, I mean, even though she acts so hard and tough and everything, she wasn't so hard that she would kill him.
No, never. Yeah. No, she was so, if you look at her actions, what she did in the book, she was the most caring in so many ways. The way that she delivered Elmira's baby, is that the character's name?
Yeah.
The way that she cared for her, the way she cared for her daughters, the way she took Lorena in. I also want to say really quickly that I loved the conversation that she had with Gus. I think it was with Gus about Lorena. Yeah, it was with Gus, because he says, don't judge her when, it's revealed what Lorena does or what Lorena did for a living. And she said, I don't judge her. If I were in certain situations, I'm sure I might have had to succumb to doing that myself.
Sure.
And I guess like for me, kind of like you, Darko, for me, this was somewhat educational, because I know that in every culture in the world, basically, we have prostitution for women. I mean, that's, I think, part of like almost every culture's history, I want to say. I mean, that could be wrong, but I feel like it's
certainly the vast majority.
A lot of history. But I didn't realize it was so prominent at that time in history in the West. I guess I should have included it because I have read it a little bit, but yeah, I think that it just became more realistic. Like, yeah, what was there for women at the time? They were property otherwise. So I don't know.
And you've also got,
Elmira.
I think, a massive need. Like, you've got a whole bunch of guys going out basically by themselves, doing guy things, horrible guy things. And then when they come into town, all they want to do is drink and have sex, And I think there was a very strong supply and demand connection there.
Well, see, from that standpoint, I do appreciate July's character, because if we're looking at this book from the lens of critiquing masculinity, I like that we have the extreme. We have the extreme of men who think that being masculine is violence and sex and whatever. And then we have the other extreme with July, which is really passive. I think that that's a good balance. In a way, I kind of felt for July, to be honest with you all, though, only because of what he went through with Joe's death and Janie's death, and just the passages in the book where he has suicidal ideation. So I think he has serious mental health challenges. So I guess that's something I considered the whole time. I don't know.
I don't think he has a lot of self-esteem.
Really?
No,
You
that's
think?
an understatement. Elmira was a pretty terrible character.
Oh my God. The female Jake.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Just the female Jake.
The two of them, I was like, you two should get together and kill each other. Like, they're both narcissistic psychos, or not psychos, sociopaths. Yeah.
Get together, they're both they're both so similar. And Robin joked, they're like, yeah, they're both too self-absorbed. It wouldn't work. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Somebody said.
I feel like Larry McMurtry even hated her because the way her death just kind of happened off screen, like whatever.
Yeah. Done with her.
Yeah.
Poor Zooey, or however you pronounce that guy's
Zwei.
name. Way.
Zwei. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Poor simple-minded Zwei. Like, dude, this isn't going to end well for anybody. Yeah. No, there was. I mean, obviously, there was a huge range of male characters, and it felt like almost every one of them was like a different aspect of masculinity. You know, like there weren't many male characters that I would actually just simply call good. You know, Gus was maybe the goodest of all of them. I mean, other than Dietz, like Dietz didn't do much in a way. Like he was scouting and stuff, but he was almost not really a central character. He was always kind of he always felt a bit sideliney character, but like of the main sort of driving forces of the book, Gus was probably as good as it gets as far as being a good guy. What do you think? Skeptical look.
I think so much of it comes through in how he handles Lorena. And which honestly, at one point I got a little sad about it because she was constantly offering herself to him as a form of security. Like, I need to tie him down by offering him sex. And I guess at one point he does take her up on that, which I was really happy he didn't for a long time. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he's perfect, but I think he definitely is the more, he shouldn't have been perfect either. So I think he did embody, I think, the best aspects of masculinity in the book, in my opinion.
I mean, say one thing about Gus McCall. That man has Gus, that man has a lot of audacity. Wink, wink. If you know, you know.
He and sorry, Joseph. Looks like you were about to say something.
Oh, if we're talking about Gus, all I think about is the scene in San Antonio with the barkeep just slamming his face, breaking the guy's nose, and then and it was all because the guy was just being a douche. It's like, yeah, you don't treat people like that, especially ones that are armed and are literally on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, but again, that's also like, I used to be a legend. Mm-hmm. Why am I not a legend anymore?
Yeah.
You know, like breaking a guy's nose doesn't change that. It's really, in a way, it's just like childish acting out. But your history is over, you know, like you're part of the past. The world has changed. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Andrew.
Late.
Red Lonesome Dove?
He started it.
Hope so.
DNF'd.
Yeah.
DNF'd. Surprise, surprise.
I mean, in fairness,
Andrew DNF'd the
he
book.
DNF'd it for similar reasons that I almost DNF'd it, so I can't really, point fingers.
I think it's understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Why don't we get into that? Because I think everybody here, I know Darko at one point was also like, man, this is hard. But you were like, you and I had some background conversations where, to start with, it sounded like you were done. You were over it. You were not going to read further. Why is that? Tori.
Oh, I thought you were talking to Darko for a second. Sorry.
No. I was saying he. I know he also had problems with it, but you had like a big enough problem with it, you almost threw it.
Yeah. So, how to organize my thoughts on this? I think part of it is, at the point that I started reading Lonesome Dove, I had kind of gotten to a point in fiction / fantasy in general where like I'm just so tired of reading sexual violence. I'm so tired of it. And like I signed up for a Western about a cattle drive, right? Which it is. But especially in the first half, the focus is so heavily who is with a whore, who isn't with a whore, who wants one, who's thinking about one, who's never had one before. And that's like the whole mindset of so much of the first half of the book. And I was just like, I just couldn't care less about any of this. And I'm more interested in the like more cattle drive part of this and the relationship about the motley crew of characters and who's going on the cattle drive and all this kind of stuff, which is one of the reasons why I think Pi and Dietz in the beginning were kind of my refuge a little bit.
They weren't constantly talking about
no,
horror?
and like Pi's interaction with the widow in Lonesome Dove was absolutely precious, and I loved it. And so there were like little moments, but I think the point, since we're in spoiler section now, the point where I put the book down for 2.5 weeks was the gang rape of Lorena, because I got to that point in the book and I was like, I can't. And like one of the things I find interesting is when I talk about this topic, I do get a lot of comments from people that are like, yes, but that's realistic. And I'm like, great. I don't care. Like, I don't know that you need to remind me that it's realistic. Thank you. Like, not to be really frustrated about it, but as a survivor, like I don't need to read it to know that it's realistic. I don't know if other people do apparently, but like, I don't know. I got really mad at it and wasn't even sure I would be here today. So,
I thought it was the thing with Roscoe and that like crazy lady in the woods. That part was really stupid. I was like, that was the one part of the book where I was like, wow, that was dumb, and that didn't really make any sense. But
like, I can certainly understand as a woman how it's easier to read about a woman raping a man than it is about a gang of men raping a woman.
I almost DNF'd it at that point too, actually, though. Like,
yeah,
there were like 3 or 4 points. That one for me, it was like, okay, we're with Roscoe. Oh, wow, cool. There's a woman who's running her own farm. That's awesome. Like, this is going to be a little bit of a breath of fresh air in the midst of all this other stuff. And then I was very heavily disappointed. So
yeah, I mean, there are a lot of really ugly things in this book, primarily around sexual violence, sexism, and racism.
mm-hmm.
But the one that really bothered me in a totally different way was that woman raping Roscoe, not because it happened, not because it was in the book. I mean, it's not worse or better in any way than any of the other things, but because it was used as comedy.
I was
yes.
That was the thing that pissed me off.
It
I
was
was like,
I didn't think it was funny at all.
It was not funny at all.
You're playing a comedic scene. Like the whole scene up until the rape is this weird banter, and it was kind of funny, like because Roscoe's such a kind of funny character anyway. And then all of a sudden I was like, is she raping him?
Yeah.
It seems like she's raping him. How is this funny? You know, and I definitely wasn't laughing, and like throwing something like that in as comic relief seems really a bit off to me.
Yeah. He's sitting on him. I'm like, I texted the group. I'm like, yo, is she sexually assaulting this man?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Absolutely.
I don't laugh. It's horrible, but like,
yeah,
I was so thrown off. I was like, okay, this is happening.
So, Tori, having said all of that, that begins essentially a recovery arc, so to speak, for Lorena.
Mm-hmm.
Did that in any way was that? Did you find that well dealt with?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I think it's such a double-sided coin, because I think that McMurtry wrote her character in a very sympathetic way, and in a way that, you know, I didn't think it made sense. We'll put it that way. Like her arc and the things that she struggles with her mental illnesses because of all of the horrible experiences that she's had from an incredibly young age. It makes sense. And I think he wrote her dissociation and detachment from everything in life really, really well.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that she found Clara at the end, and that Clara offered her for the first time in her life, because San Francisco, it's not specifically San Francisco, right? She has this
It's a
utopia
dream.
in her head, right?
Yeah.
That, and in that, it's, if I can get here, I won't have to have the experiences that I'm having
I'll be
here
safe.
anymore. Right. I'll be safe. I'll
It's
be
a dream
whatever.
of safety. Yeah.
And so in a way, Clara's farm was her San Francisco. And I think she
Yeah.
didn't realize it necessarily. But going there suddenly gave her a sense of agency that she had never had before, a sense of camaraderie with other women, and a place where she was no longer expected to behave a certain way. So yeah,
and where,
I think
and where
that part,
nobody is only interacting with her to use her.
right.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
appreciated that.
Yeah. Yeah. I also I really appreciated the whole Gus thing with her.
Mm.
Like, it's not perfect by any means. But it made me really like Gus. And then be a little disappointed in Gus. But to start with, it made me like Gus like 10 times more, because I was like, she's totally broken and helpless at this point. And Gus is just like, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. And I'm not going to take advantage of anything. You know, I'm just going to keep everything away from you, give you the space you need, be there for you if you need it. All of that. And I thought, wow, that's a good example of masculinity. And then, yeah, slightly disappointing sort of towards the end, but he more than anybody, McMurtry, I mean, not Gus, McMurtry, didn't make anything in the entire book perfect. You know, like he's constantly setting up ideals. Like the ideal in that case would be that Gus would be a chivalrous knight forever and not take Lorena up on any of the offers and just be her protector. And he doesn't just do that. He does that mostly, but in the end, he's not perfect.
And then the ideal with Lorena is that she would just fully recover from her trauma, and she doesn't. She never fully recovers. She does become codependent on Gus for a while there, but even when she is able to get into Lorena's household, she still never fully is able to open up. I mean, she bonds with one daughter, and she doesn't even talk to Lorena. Yeah.
Clara.
I mean, Clara. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a line that Gus says, because Call asks him, is the girl all right after this happens? And Gus responds, basically, she's young. She won't forget it, but she might outlive it. And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it. And I appreciated that, like, nothing about Lorena's arc felt like wish fulfillment. And that is a very fine line in a lot of arcs that include something like this. And I appreciated that he was going for different angles about what the aftermath of this actually looks like.
I remember that exact line. This is the amazing thing about this book, is as long as it is, like, the lines stay with you. It's so memorable, the things that people say in this book. Yeah, that's so well said, Tori, about how, and I was also noting when Gus was on his way to save her, he was concerned. He was even concerned even then. He said that he had known of women who had been taken by, I think, the Comanches or the specific tribe that did this, and that oftentimes they would go so far away, like they disassociate so much that you couldn't bring them back. So his concern was not only like her survival physically, but her mental survival. He already knew that was going to be risky, or that was not guaranteed.
Yeah. How broken is she going to be? Yeah. Yeah.
Legally speaking, you are correct. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, I've been moving around. I'm using my phone, so my leg is falling asleep. So I'm like, oh, I don't hear anything in the house. I'll go out to the living room, and then someone came in the house. I'm like, fuck. So here we are.
So there was a part of the book that was actually about driving cattle to Montana.
Yes.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, strangely.
It's pretty dangerous. I'm like, damn.
Yeah,
It's
the
really
environment for me was a character.
Mhm.
You know, would you agree? Like, it was terrifying just to be in a thunderstorm with these guys. You know. That reminds me of the other thing. Like the first moment that we actually see anybody doing any cowboy things, I think it's like after 100 pages, when they go to Mexico to steal the horses. One of the things I loved about it, it's a Western book. And the first time there's any shooting, there's a lot of shooting and nobody gets hit.
Yeah.
You know, which I mean, of course, like if you've ever shot a gun, you know that it's hard to hit a target.
It's not that easy. Yeah.
No, it's especially with a handgun at any kind of range. And the guns back then were like much less accurate and dependable than the guns today. And you're on a horse, and it's night, and there's dust everywhere from all of these horses riding around. Of course, you're not going to hit anything. Like you're shooting to feel better about yourself, basically, more than anything. And I thought it was interesting that most of the violence in the book is not guns. You know, there's a fair bit of violence, but it's much more personal. It's like right in your face, and a guy with a knife is doing something, or Gus is bashing a guy's nose in, or you know, that kind of thing.
Sometimes nature too. It's just like nature's a bitch sometimes.
That's back to the environment. I mean, this played for me in with this, or was the basis, I guess, of this theme, or one side of this theme I was talking about, where civilization comes in and things change, right? And progress has a cost, but it also has advantages, obviously. Like if you've got a house, a thunderstorm's not that scary, or a lot less scary, you know? But if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're sleeping on the ground without even a tent, I'm glad Gus had a tent for Lorena. Then suddenly, like, the weather becomes a threat, you know?
There's even like lightning, and they're like, oh crap, what else could go wrong here? they even shade on it. They're like, what else could go wrong? And then it starts like lightning, and they're like, damn it. You know? Great.
Yeah, and it made me think of a lot of fantasy books I've read, because I think all of us, or most of us, have probably read numerous fantasy books where they're on some sort of quest and they've got to do some sort of long travel and they've got some sort of obstacle. But because it's a fantasy book, we're like, we have distance to it because it's a secondary world, and you know, those kinds of things don't happen in our world and whatever. But this is totally our world. It's just normal. It's the chunk of America, in the middle of America, and all of these things are actually there, that they're talking about.
Getting hit by a cloud of grasshoppers or
Yeah.
whatever.
It was crazy how grateful it made me feel that I don't live in that.
Ugh, yeah.
You know, that I don't have to deal with those kinds of things basically in my life ever. I traveled in India a bit where it gets a little more raw. And there are places where things are a little kind of crazy, but like I'm never going to have to deal with most of what they went through. Why do you think this was an interesting question I kept asking myself throughout the book. Why do you think Cole decided to go to Montana?
Lack of purpose. There's a line in the book, and Clara says it to Gus, but I think it applies to Cole as well. Clara goes, "You can't," and she's basically laying out why they can't get together. And she goes, "You can't ever stay in one place at one time. You can't like stay." I think it's the same thing with Cole. He can't stay in one place. He has to keep moving. But
Which
Tori,
is funny because they stayed in Lonesome Dove quite a while. Like they weren't there for a year.
I think Newt is a big key to that, to be honest, because I think Call is the type of character who, like you mentioned before, Matt, he is a coward in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to his emotions. And I think recognizing he's getting older, Newt is getting to the point where he's aware now of more than he used to be. He's becoming a young man, and Call is, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So he's been able to kind of run away, quote unquote, from a lot of this stuff. And all of a sudden, things are getting uncomfortable again. So he gives himself a quest that's going to take him a lot of time, a long way to a completely different place, because he's trying to find, I got to have something to focus on that isn't all of this. And if I sit and don't do anything, I'm just going to sit with my emotions. And that's, who would want to do that? So, and I think at the end, you see a continuation of that, because Gus knew 100% what he was doing when he sent Call back down to Texas. It wasn't for Gus, I don't think. I think it was a little bit, but I think mostly it was, I know that you're going to need to run away again. And I know you better than anybody else. Go back down to Texas. Leave. Gus knew Newt was going to be left in charge. So he's like, once again, okay, if you're not going to, own up to your son, get out of his way, and I think you see that moment when, by the way, one of my other favorite characters in the book is the Hell Bitch. I love her. She's amazing. And I love that McMurtry gave the horses so much character. That made me so happy. Yeah. But when he gives the horse to Newt, and that's the closest he ever gets, and then he's running away again, Yeah. So that's my answer to that.
Yeah, I remember reading in the, I don't know if any of you have the same copy that I have. I don't have it on me, but there's a little foreword from Larry McMurtry at the beginning, and he goes, I was wondering and he was doing that kind of cute writer thing that I generally get annoyed by, but it's very true. But he goes, I thought I was gonna have a moment where I was gonna write where he was finally gonna spill it to Newt that he was his son, but he never did. He just gave him the horse. And then he's like, and then Newt dies at a later episode. I'm like, fuck! I'm like, because I thought that was like the big, what was going to be really sad at the end of this book. It wasn't, thank God. But I was like, damn it, Larry. Don't be spoiling the book like that.
I never read forwards because of that, unless it's like afterwards and I just forgot to read the forward. So.
Forward is always the afterword for me.
It is.
Yeah. It's like read the damn book first. That's what I'm here for. My copy, I mean, this is a UK edition. It doesn't have that forward.
I have the 25th anniversary edition, which does have the preface by the author.
Right.
No.
Anybody else on why Cole decided to go to Montana?
Joseph, go.
Yeah,
Go, Joseph.
hit us with it.
I think it was just avoiding. I think it was a mix of avoiding Newt and having something to do. I think that I know that Gus talks about it, like missing the frontier and the fighting and the danger, and I think that's another big reason that Cole wanted to leave was that missing that.
Yeah,
I had a feeling.
Symbolism, romanticism. Yeah.
I had a feeling. I mean, maybe this is just my dark mind. I kind of felt like it was an unconscious suicide in a way.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, okay, I don't just want to sit somewhere and die. I want to be out doing something, and preferably like an Indian kills me, the environment kills me, whatever. But I don't just want to get old and die. I want to be doing something, and he's sort of reclaiming his youth, which was very, very dangerous, in the hopes that his youth will kill him in a way, you know?
That's a good theory. I like that one a lot. I also, yeah, no, I would agree with that. One thing I'll also add to that when it comes to the characters like Newt and these other guys who are following, I felt like that's what I mean about the coming of age trope, that it doesn't quite go as we expect. Because by the end of that journey, when they make it to Montana, I felt like there was a lot of conversation about how these men were, yes, dependent on Gus until Gus passed away, but they were dependent on Call. Like, they didn't know how to function without Call leading them. They weren't independent young men by the end of that journey. And Call resented that too. He didn't like that.
Yeah, and I mean, again, something exactly that was something I found very frustrating about Call. I'm like, the reason all of these guys don't know what they're doing is you didn't teach them. Like, if anyone should have been coaching these guys, mentoring them, supporting them in being more independent and more capable, it's you. Like, you should have been doing this. And Gus, I guess, you know.
That's kind of like the theme of leadership that Tori was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I mean they're constantly sort of, or Cole specifically is constantly acting like he's this big badass captain and he's the boss and all of that, but he's not mentoring the kids he's got at all. You know, he's just expecting them to somehow spontaneously figure it out, and then being angry with them when they're not as capable as he thinks they should be. So yeah, we lost Britain. He's still down the bottom, but I don't know, he disconnected. I'll kick him just to so he can reconnect properly.
I think that's one of the reasons why Call spends so much time with his horse, though, because there's an element of that wild nature that he's searching for in her, and she doesn't take him seriously at all. So
yeah.
I think it was kind of a relief compared to the pressure of walking into a camp where everybody kind of looks at you almost like a kind of demigod sort of character, you know.
Well, I'm getting cat visit.
I thought it was interesting. I don't know if it's just me who thought of this, but I liked how some of the characters mirrored each other. Like, I think Jake Spoon and Gus are almost the same. A friend of mine put it quite nicely, but he would describe it as they're basically the same characters at different points in their lives. Or if Gus were more of a selfish ass, then he would probably be Jake Spoon. Same thing with July and Call, I think. Except, you know, I don't think Call is as much of a wiener as July is. So I feel bad for July. You guys are just mean. July's not a bad guy. All right? You guys are being mean.
I don't think anyone ever said he's a bad guy. He's just like a guy who does nothing.
Yes.
Like he doesn't make a single decision in the entire book. You know, like.
Well, he did go to find Elmira. He did make a
Yeah, because someone else told him to.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, like, well, actually, I think Elmira, he went to find Jake because someone else told him to. He went to find Elmira because he had this concept of what a marriage should be like, and couldn't accept that his wife was a sociopath who just didn't want to be with him. You know, like, it's staring you in the face, and he was like, "No, she's my wife. I have to go get her." You know?
No, but going back to my main point, I thought it was interesting. I thought the characters were mirroring each other in several parts of the story.
I didn't really quite get that personally, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like for example, let's see, July. You said July and Call. Yeah, I didn't. I don't know. I mean, I don't quite see it. Sorry.
Well, I was thinking more Jake and Gus though, because
I don't see it either. Because
I don't see that either.
Gus has respect for women, and he has loyalty, I think, to some extent. And respect in as far as you could expect at that time. And then,
just think about it. You know, they're both kind of. I will admit they are different. So before you guys get after me, just think about it. You know, they're both kind of lazy. They both like having a good time. They both, they're just comfortable with where they're at. Except one of them is a selfish asshole, and the other one is, well, a bit more noble. He's just bored and, wants things to do.
I mean, that to me made them fundamentally almost opposites of each other. There isn't a single person in the entire world that Jake cares about except himself. Nobody.
That's true.
And Gus is the only person in the book who consistently connects with, or at least tries to, as many people as he can. Like, he's constantly talking to people. He's constantly caring about people. He's one of the nicest people in the entire book, And to me, he felt like the opposite of Jake. Like,
that's what I was gonna say. They
were
maybe
foiled.
they
they're
mirror
foiled.
each other with like a
That's
contrast.
Yeah.
and being opposites.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think Gus does challenge people to, even though he gets along with people, he argues with people. That's like one of his traits too.
It's one of
He
his
doesn't shy away
favorite
from
hobbies.
conflict.
Yeah.
You could say in some ways Jake was kind of not Jake, Jake. Jake was kind of a coward in the decisions that he made because it was so self-serving and so narcissistic.
I thought it was also interesting with Jake that, like, all of the really bad things he did were accidents.
Yes.
Like, he didn't decide to kill a guy. He shot intending not to hit anybody, but accidentally hit a dentist.
Yeah.
That's the thing that got him in trouble in the first place. Like, he doesn't really have, he's kind of like July, if July had at least the drive to keep moving. Jake never really decides to do anything. He sort of wanders around, and when he gets to town, he gambles because he likes gambling, and he gets a whore because he likes women, and he accidentally shoots someone, and then he has to move on, but he doesn't actually have any goal or any drive to do anything particular. He's not, in a way, he's not really a bad guy. He's super selfish, but he's not inherently, like, horrible. He just screws up constantly.
Yeah. I actually really appreciated his character from a narrative perspective, how he's just like, he is the inciting incident that causes so much tragedy to happen. And you're right. Like, he didn't want any of those tragedies specifically to happen, but every selfish decision he made ended up causing that to occur. He caused those things to happen. Yeah,
it's kind of ridiculous that sort of an offhand comment that he makes about something he doesn't care about at all. Because the only thing he's thinking of at the beginning of the book is he's got to stay away from the law because he screwed up, you know? And he just sort of like, hey, what about Montana? And then all of a sudden that's like the whole story for the entire book because Cole wants to die somewhere doing something.
Like, yes.
What did you all think about the way he died? The way that Jake Spoon died?
Feel bad for a second.
I really appreciated how he went out. Honestly, I thought that showed like the one glimmer of character that he had, and it made him, I think, kind of redeemable in the end, at least in my eyes. He wasn't all bad, all selfish. You know?
But like Ron said, it was also kind of an accident. You know.
What do you mean?
I'll admit though, it probably hit a little too close for me because there's someone I care about who's with someone who's kind of like a Jake Spoon, so that kind of inflamed some anger there. But yeah, no, Jake Spoon's the worst. I think a lot of us have known a Jake. To be honest with you, I wouldn't be shocked. I've known a couple of Jakes in my time.
I think that what Ron's talking about is what Jake made a name for himself with was accidentally shooting that guy in the neck. Like everything that he's known for, good and bad, is an accident.
Yeah.
And also, to kind of talk about similarity, Gus is the only person who really sees through Jake in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he's charming and good looking. So a lot of and seems to be this maybe sort of kind of romantic character in some sort of a way. So I think a lot of the guys, it sounds like they look up to him and think that he's special somehow. And Gus definitely doesn't have any illusions about Jake.
I would argue that Jake is only romantic from a toxic masculinity perspective.
Right. No, I'm not saying he's fundamentally a romantic character. I'm saying
right.
He's romanticized by a lot of the guys in the group.
Yeah.
You know.
It was the only one who's really sad that he's gone. You know, Colin Gus just like, oh well, that happened, you know. Well, actually I think someone's haunted by Jake's death who isn't Newt. I forget.
Newt.
No, it is, but I forget. Someone else was haunted by Jake's death. I forgot who it was.
Well, I think Gus and Cole were pretty haunted by it since they had to kill him. Yeah, I mean that was.
Yeah, but I thought their reaction was more like, oh well, you know, it's kind of more Cole's reaction. He's like, oh well, you know, he made his choice. Go away now.
Yeah,
I didn't get the impression it was easy for either of them.
No. I mean, Cole didn't have any question that it needed to be done. Right? He was clear that it needed to be done, but hanging a guy that you used to be a ranger with, that you can remember in better days and all of that. I mean, I felt like that haunted Cole and Gus. You know, that both of them wished they didn't have to do it.
It kind of made me feel like they were sort of hypocritical because you hung guys for stealing horses, but yet that's what you did. Like in the
but they didn't steal horses from Mexicans. It's okay if you're stealing them from Mexicans. I mean, like very, very clear double standard because there's a border there. We went over the border. And those are Mexicans' horses. Of course, you
I
take
guess
them
yeah,
if you want to.
yeah. There was some.
Oh yeah, no, I was a little surprised when you said that you thought that Mexicans were portrayed really well. I mean, they weren't portrayed much.
Yeah, they weren't portrayed much. I think in comparison to other groups, they were not.
Sure.
They were not as condemned, I think, as other groups. So
yeah.
But I was also specifically thinking too about the Mexican who was on Clara's property.
Yeah. And I forget his name, but the Mexican cook
Oh,
that they had at the beginning of the
Yeah.
that was
trip.
hilarious.
Boulevard.
Boulevard, yeah.
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 Yeah. Crazy
Cholo.
guy.
Cholo's the name of the.
Cholo, that's right.
Thank you.
The guy on Clara's
Mhm.
property. Yeah, that was pretty like her. The whole thing with her ranch always pretty much felt good.
Mhm.
You know, it was such a positive, sort of nurturing, safe place. Even though she's so spiky, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that her story, like just looking at like story structure, was just timed perfectly in the novel. Like there was like a lull going into her showing up in the book, and then I was immediately just I was just reinvested in the story as soon as she showed up. I think it was just like perfect when it came to like story structure for her to be where she was in the book.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Because I felt the same way. I was like, oh no, we're introducing another storyline. I'm not sure. I want to depart from where we were. And then I suddenly got so invested that when we switched back to the group, I was thinking, I want to go back to Clara and find out what's going on with her. So I got very invested very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, Joseph, just because of the structure, her and her ranch and her kids and everything function so well as like breathing room. You know, it's like there's so many hard, unpleasant things happening throughout it. And then you get to them and you're like, well, I can imagine living with her could be kind of annoying, but actually it's such a positive environment, like in the things that count. She's kind of cranky, and you know, not everybody always wants to hear the truth, but she always says it. She's a little prickly, but yeah, her ranch is such a positive place. And it was the I didn't really see it coming, but it was the only logical place that Lorena could end up, other than maybe dead. You know, like I was actually half waiting for Lorena to kill herself for a lot of the book, because I thought dealing with what you're dealing with out in the wilderness like that is really, really hard to recover from. And it was so satisfying emotionally to see her land at Clara's, you know, and she doesn't become 100% again immediately or anything like that, but she's got a safe space. She's got some people around her who are being good to her, and that was so good to see. PI's little adventure, not Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but PI's little adventure.
I think I thought, yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
What did you think about that? When he's off by himself and barely alive and trying to get back.
That was pretty weird.
Why? What do you mean weird?
No, it's just like, you know, he's out there and then he's like naked, and then he's basically like dehydrated, and he starts hallucinating and he sees deets, you know. I mean, I don't say weird in a bad way, but it was just kind of like, all right, yeah.
Other thoughts?
I'm going to let other people talk because I feel like I've been talking a lot in this discussion.
We should force Joseph to talk for at least 10 minutes.
Joseph, come on.
I don't have much to say about that. I could bring something else up.
Please.
I think one of my favorite things in the book was also like the most obvious, like the most obvious in your face theme, which was the Texas bull, and then ending up fighting the grizzly bear. Like that's literally the story. Like,
yeah.
And it's like, this is incredibly obvious, but I'm still all for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that part.
Let's have one symbolic scene that represents the entire book. Yeah.
The most in your face symbolism, but still it's like perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you couldn't help but like, as soon as he described early on that bull, I was like, you're going to do something with this bull. Like, you've got to.
It's Chekhov's bull.
Yeah, it's Chekhov's bull. The bull is on the table. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then the running into a grizzly bear, which again, like, that's the environment trying to kill you. It's like, oh my god, a grizzly bear, like, that is a really, really serious problem. And then the bull's like, nah, I'm not having any of it.
And that is Montana for you. So it was kind of perfect.
Yeah, totally.
I loved it. I felt for that bull too when they sewed his face. I'm like,
And he just kept going.
yeah.
Like, he's ripped to shreds.
I gotta say, I think the bull's one of the best characters in the book. Like 10 out of 10.
Okay. Didn't he? I'm trying to remember what happened to him in the end. Did he just sort of fade away into the back of the herd and
At one point, but then he came through, right?
He came back again. Yeah.
Yeah, he made it through.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Aw.
Do any of you, before we maybe sign off, do any of you have favorite bits or problematic bits or bits you would like to bring up about the book?
I think one thing, at least I don't think we've talked about yet, is how toxic some of the relationships are in this book. Particularly like Gus and Call, and I think Claire brought that, like, they just enabled each other's worst tendencies, and neither one of them would be in the situations they were if it wasn't for them, like, just going along with the other. Even though, I mean, it was very supportive friendship, but still very toxic in the end, because they ended up, not so great circumstances, because neither one of them could deny the other or leave one another. They just said it was like almost being codependent.
Absolutely.
I was really by Gus' death, of course. I felt really empty though after he died. I didn't like cry, but I did play I didn't play it, but I went on YouTube and looked up Amazing Grace on bagpipes and poured one out for Augustus McCrae. Because if ever someone deserved a bagpipe version of Amazing Grace, it would be Augustus McCrae.
Go ahead, Tori.
I was also very upset at the end of the book when the pigs made the entire journey and like survived everything. And then they're just like, and by the way, we cooked them and ate them. And I was like, I can't. I what else are you going to take from us, McMurtry? Like,
Right?
even the pigs.
Yeah,
Seriously.
after you let him kill the pigs, Gus loved those pigs.
Especially after Gus died. That just felt like added insult to injury.
Betrayal.
There's a line that I tabbed in chapter 74 that I kind of felt like summed up the atmosphere of the whole story. And it's Gus is talking, which is like 90% of the book. But he says, that old badger made a good snatch and got himself a few bones, but the ground will get his bones too in a year or two. It's like I told you last night, son, the earth is mostly just a boneyard.
I love that. Yes.
That was such a good line. And I felt like it just kind of encapsulated the kind of bleakness of the story and how you know that even at the end, all you can expect is death and, what was it all for anyways?
Oh, I took it differently. I thought it was actually kind of comforting because it's this idea of we're all going to die, but there's more, everyone's come before you is under you. And I don't know, like there was something pretty poetic about it. And
for sure.
felt like, was it Newt who was listening? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Newt or Dish who got that message.
Newt.
But recontextualized his understanding of death and thinking about life and death. Beautiful line.
Yeah.
Yeah. I sort of took that bit, and that sort of thing comes up a few times also in like visual stuff where there are bones lying around a lot in various places and things. It's a sort of constantly recurring little theme. specifically with Gus, I took it kind of as, you know, don't take yourself too seriously. Like, it doesn't really matter how awesome you think you are or what kind of achievements or whatever you like. You're going to be bones no matter what. So, you know, do your best, but like don't worry too much in a way about details
I
of your
think
life.
Sorry, my
because-
phone died.
I think related to that is kind of the line. I think I was trying to find this earlier in the conversation, but it's when Call is with Gus at the end and asking if he wants vengeance on the Native Americans who did this to him, and Gus says the line, "We've won more than our share with the natives. They didn't invite us here, you know. We got no call to be vengeful." And there are a couple of times throughout the book where Gus tries to quell this need to be vengeful and tries to understand from even the other side, even the other side that he fights at times. So I thought it was also all the more tragic that later on in the book, Call, when he's in Montana, before he makes the journey back to Texas, he starts to get to know some of the native tribes there, even the one that killed Gus, and he finds it all the more tragic that he sees the peacefulness of some of these people, that it was in some ways just a misunderstanding, being the wrong place at the wrong time, things happening that way.
There were particular bits where I felt very strongly that Gus was that his role in particular places was to be the modern perspective, you know, the not 19th century perspective, but the our perspective kind of, where, you know, like he sounded in a way almost unbelievably understanding of the Indians for a Texas Ranger.
Yes.
In that time, you know. And he was a very philosophical dude, and I mean, it's not like I couldn't buy into it, but he very much felt like, you know, being a modern perspective at a time where a lot of people were like, Indians aren't even really people, and they're a nuisance, and we should kill them all. You know,
I think what you're saying too, it's interesting because I went back and I if you go back to the very beginning, I did go back to the very beginning just very recently. And even in the opening, he's confronted with that rattlesnake, and he doesn't immediately shoot the rattlesnake because he believes that you should let creatures have a little time, like not try to attack them right away. And sure enough, the rattlesnake stops rattling and makes its way away, you know, and so he believes in that, like respecting life enough at times, like to give people a chance. And he said, and in contrast, in his mind, he's thinking, Call is the opposite. Call would have just shot the snake.
Cole would have shot it and not thought twice about it and forgotten about it 5 minutes later. Yeah.
And also just wanting to circle back to what Darko was saying about Call and Gus. I think, to me, Call and Gus, yes, I think that their friendship in some ways can be seen as unhealthy. But I also think, to me, by the end of the book, I was thinking they remind me of an old married couple. Like even the way that they would have the same arguments over and over again.
Yeah, and they knew each
like
other well enough that there were a lot of bits where one or the other of them, usually it's more Gus because Gus thinks about other people a lot more than Cole does, but where Gus doesn't even go and talk to Cole about something because he knows exactly how it's going to go, and he knows exactly how Cole is, and he waits for a different opportunity or whatever because he knows him so well. Yeah, very much like an old married couple. Yeah. Sorry, Brenton.
Doesn't like Clara say something like "calls the love of your life" or something like that? I remember she says something similar like that. Mm-hmm. Something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously no gay relationship going on or anything like that.
No.
But they are like more committed to each other than anybody is to anybody in the entire book.
Totally.
You know, like there is no other more committed relationship anywhere than the two of them.
Yeah. Can I roll my eyes at Dish real quick? Because like he was all like, "Oh, Lorena, my love, I'm gonna sing Gene Autry songs," and then like she leaves, and he's like, "Okay, still got a job to do." I mean, he went back to her, but it still kind of annoyed me a little bit.
Pretty much. I mean, that was also sort of in a very general way a theme. Like, there's nobody in the entire book who wants something that they get. You know, like everybody wants something, and nobody gets it.
No.
Mhm.
Like it just like probably the closest thing. I mean, it's kind of sad to say this, but almost the closest thing to anyone getting what they want is Lorena actually settling down with Clara because she at least gets a safe place.
Mhm.
You know, she doesn't get San Francisco, but she gets a place where she can just be, and people aren't trying to hurt her. But everybody has got some sort of dream, like the whole book all the way along. Like Gus has got this romantic idea of Clara, and you know, maybe it's our time now, and all of that, and she just shoots it down immediately. And she isn't having any of it. And you know, Gus, or no, not Gus, Cole, for whatever reason, wants a ranch in Montana. And Gus tricks him out of it. Basically, he was like, "No, you're going back to Texas. Sorry." Like nobody gets what they want.
I guess that brings into context that last line that I didn't like.
I mean,
does anyone want to talk about the last line? Because like,
I'll read the last line, even though it's
Thank you.
it's a hard line, because people may not remember it.
Something like he was sad about the whore or something.
Well, Call is back in town, like he's gone back to the beginning, and they're talking about the saloon which is burned down. And the guy he's talking to, Dillard, says when she left once, couldn't stand it. Once is the guy who ran the saloon. When she left once, couldn't stand it. He sat in her room a month and then he burned it. Who? Cole asked, looking at the ashes, which is also super sad. Like Cole isn't even aware of the woman that they're talking about, right? The woman, Dillard whispered. The woman. They say he missed that whore. That's Lorena, who was the whore in the only whore in the saloon.
That was a weird scene too, when Once just like is like, please don't go, and he kind of like, I hate to say it like this, but he kind of simps over Lorena. Then he like bangs her, and then she's like, I'm gonna go now, and then that's it. You're just like, okay, that was weird. And then he burns himself alive. You're like, what the hell? What happened?
At that point at the beginning, when she leaves and Once is reacting to it, I thought Once is just living in a dream world. He's got a story in his head, this romantic story. He's a more civilized guy. He comes from the East and hasn't been out there his whole life or anything. And he had been telling himself that she was the love of his life. She was, because she was a woman, she was maybe giving the whole place a more civilized, softer feeling, whatever. And she was clear that she wasn't there for that, you know, that shouldn't be her function. And she just left and Once went crazy. But considering, like I said right at the beginning, I went into this book expecting it to be a book about cowboying, and it's mostly a book about guys wanting to sleep with women, and all of their weird trips and delusions about women. So I thought that ending was absolutely appropriate, but not very pleasant. Yeah,
Well, I thought it was fitting because of what you said. You said it's about how no one really gets what they want. That kind of just sums it up at the end a little bit.
Other thoughts? Darko, you haven't said anything for a while. Darko?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
Overall, I mean, I think it seemed like it was like one big midlife crisis. I think the book, which I can kind of relate to. So where, you know, you get caught in these nostalgia moments of your halcyon days of the youth, and if you're given an opportunity to relive that, I mean, a lot of us probably would do so, and they did, and unfortunately, it didn't work out for a lot of them. And it's, I was worried it'd be like Reservoir Dogs or something by the end of the book where it's like nobody, but yeah, I think it's this one big midlife crisis playing out the whole story.
And also, I think a very strong message that you can't go back. Like you can do something which is an attempt, and you can go all the way to Montana for it, but you're not going to get what you're after. You know, you can't get any of that stuff back. As sad as it is, me being as old as I am, to accept that, it's true.
It is incredible to me, though, that Gus wasn't bitter at the end.
He lived a good life, you know. He seems like a guy who's content with things.
I'm not sure I'd go that far.
I think he expected to die
he
like that.
Well, okay, he had regrets, but like, you know, I had the gist he was okay with himself. I could be wrong there.
Say again what you said, Joseph, and expound.
Yeah, I think he expected to die like that. I think that's part of the reason he went on this journey was he keeps talking about when they were younger and fighting and things were wild. And I don't think at any point he ever mentioned getting old anywhere. He expected to die pretty much when he did.
Yeah. I remember it only very vaguely, and I couldn't pull a quote or anything, but I think he even says that at some point about getting old, that he doesn't expect to. In kind of an indirect way, but it, like I said, I remember it vaguely. I agree with you, but I also think I think Gus convinced himself to go on the whole thing because he wanted to get back to Clara. Or not because he wanted to get back to Clara, because he thought he had a future with Clara. And then I think after that was clearly not the case, then it was like, okay, I can die. You know,
But he does say something along the line somewhere about we have to finish what we started. That's the way Colin and I are. We have to finish what we started. So it seemed like he was super committed to making it to Montana at the same time.
Although it kept coming up, like in his mind,
Yes,
getting back to Clara. And I think if she hadn't so clearly said this is not going to happen, that he might have, at least for a while, I think she was right about him. Like he doesn't stay, but I think he might have split off and let the rest of them go to Montana and stayed with Clara if she would have had him. You know, if she had been like, oh, finally we can be together, you know, which
I don't think he fully expected it though, because he even has conversations with Lauren around the way. Oh, she might not even want me, and I think he was preparing himself for that could be a possibility.
Yeah,
yeah.
He had to at least check.
I'll just say really quickly though, I loved some of the action scenes with Gus, like the scene where I know Tori's gonna hate the scene, but the scene where he shoots his horse and the horses go crazy with the horse blood. I just say it because it's violence against horses, and I know you get it. But I thought that was so clever. Like I guess because I'm ignorant, I didn't know that would cause that effect. So I don't know. I like literally started sweating in some parts with the action scenes.
In that particular scene, I was also like, first of all, Gus is more of a badass than I expected. And second of all, I almost expected him to die there. You know, like he's outnumbered and everything. And then he shows that he just knows a lot of tricks. Like he's been around and he's a pretty smart dude.
Didn't someone say that Guts is pretty much useless unless it's an emergency? And then he's a guy.
Yeah,
that sounds right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he's extremely useful in those situations. Man.
Yeah. Tori, you're muted.
There we go. I was gonna say I might surprise you actually, Joanna, because I thought, like, obviously, yeah, like sad that the horse didn't make it. But also, I think that was a really, really good action scene, and it showed, because we've been hearing about the legend of Call and Gus this whole time, and up until that point, there wasn't really. Other than Gus smashing somebody's nose, like, which anybody could do. I think that scene really showed who they had been and why Gus is still alive after all this time. So,
yeah, honestly, in most of the book up to that point, he avoids work and drinks whiskey. Those are like the things he does.
True.
Yeah. Interesting question from Rogue. Anyone planning on reading more of the series, like, for example, Streets of Laredo?
No. I have no interest in it. It feels like what I know about it, it reads like it was a different book that he like shoehorned into the Lonesome Dove setting and was just like, let's nuke everything that happened before and let's make this fit into this setting. I have no interest in reading it.
Yeah.
Read the Streets of Laredo. I don't know. I felt like Lonesome Dove was a good, standalone story.
I don't feel like it. I mean, I don't know anything about Streets of Laredo. I don't know what the story actually is and in what way it's connected. But Lonesome Dove to me is just like it's a thing on its own. There isn't. I don't see any need to connect any other books to it. Like, it's done. It's extremely done.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I
Same
feel
here.
like very satisfied with it as a standalone. My grandmother-in-law has read Lonesome Dove. I had a good conversation with her. She read it a long time ago. So she read Lonesome Dove and all the books in the series, like all of this
Okay.
author's books, and she loved them all. And I was
Right.
like, wow, you were okay with that content? Because that's grisly stuff. I was surprised because she mostly reads like romance novels now. But
It surprises me overall, like how remarkably popular this book is.
oh, it's so popular.
Not that I'm saying it's bad. Like, I thought it was amazingly written and the character work is amazing and stuff. But there are so many unpleasant things in it, and it's really bleak.
Mhm.
It's a heavy book in a lot of ways.
Especially towards the end.
And I guess anything that's genuinely emotional always ends up being quite popular, but yeah, it surprises me in a way how popular the book is.
Same here because
Yeah,
I did a hold for the Kindle version on my Libby app. And fortunately, it came through at the same time I had checked out a copy from the library, so I don't actually own a copy. But it was like several months wait when I checked it out. Somehow I got it a little bit sooner than expected,
Yeah.
but there's always a wait list for Lonesome Dove.
Yeah.
At least in my
Yeah.
database.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge name. Like, I've been aware of the book for decades, just because it's such a big thing, and I love Western movies. I've never read a novel in the Western genre, but I love Western movies, and it's just one of those things that's always been there on my TBR for like, yeah, I should probably read Lonesome Dove, in a way, kind of like Shogun or something.
I was very surprised at how many people listed as their favorite book of all time. That's probably
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great book, but I mean, to be your favorite of all time out of like everything you've ever read, I mean, it's just interesting. A lot of people feel that way about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can definitely see why, like, Stephen King and George R. Martin and Joe Abercrombie and there's a lot of other writers who really like Lonesome Dove, but I can see why they like this book, particularly them, because McMurtry has that eye for human drama, as I like to call it.
His dialogue is incredible.
Dialogue and just communicating who a character is, and who they really are. Like, there's some really, really amazing character work in the book, and I totally understand being very excited about Britain's Foot.
Another thing I really like
think you heard that.
is the historical accuracy, not as much the hyper violence on like the planes and stuff. Like, a lot of the Wild West stuff is overblown. But one of the things that stood out to me is when they're in different towns and they're talking about like the dudes drunk on the street and then like the sporting women upstairs and all of that. One of my recent favorite reads, like nonfiction reads, is Hell's Half Acre, which is about the history of Fort Worth, Texas during this time. And they go to Fort Worth in this book, and like I know the places they went to. Like I drive past them to go to work, and so much of it was incredibly accurate to what you would expect in like a cattle town at that time.
Okay. I was wondering that because I'm a huge fan of Western movies, but I know nothing about the history really. And I have no idea when I'm watching any of those movies how close to accurate they actually are. And I was also thinking that in the book. I mean, there are there's a lot of detail explanation, which sounds like research, but you never know if it's really accurate.
It's very well done.
Okay.
But other than, the big thing with Westerns is like the West was never quite that violent unless we were talking about during the Civil War. But I really, really enjoyed like the accuracy of the historical aspects of the novel.
Right.
I don't know. Like I've heard some tales though about conflicts with Native Americans. I know there's a lot of history of that in New Mexico. So.
Yeah, and actually, especially in Texas, in that area, there's a book that I also read earlier this year, and it's the history of the Buffalo Soldiers, and it covers this time too, and it primarily takes place where they were Texas Rangers in the southwest of Texas. And so, the fights there were insane. And the fights there were a lot like the way they're described in the book. Like when Gus was hunting down the people that kidnapped Lorena, so much of the fighting was tracking at the time, for days or weeks. And then like, a standoff that takes 15 minutes or 15 days.
Fight. Yeah. Yeah.
Brutal.
Well, I hate to cut this short, but I have other things I wanted to do today. But this has been.
Your sound just went out, but thanks for joining us.
Fun is what I said.
Cool.
I enjoyed hanging out with all of you.
Likewise.
Yes.
Thanks for coming, Britton.
Well, I thought we were ending soon, so that's why I kind of.
Yeah, no, and I was just going to say I thought you had to go right now, but I was just after that going to say I think it's a good time to call it 2 hours. Thank you all. It's been a very enjoyable chat and discussion. Thanks for everybody on screen and also on the Fireside Discord who joined the read along. It's always fun having a sizable read along with a bunch of different thoughts and opinions. Thank you, Tori, for finishing the book and joining us. I appreciate people who have a different opinion more than having more people who have the same opinion.
Part of it was I just wanted to prove you wrong that I couldn't finish it by August 10th. So,
Yeah, well, I didn't say you couldn't. I was just curious whether you could.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you did. I'm glad you could join us. I'm glad to personally meet Joseph for the first time.
This was great.
Yeah. And I have just channel advertising. I have, as usual, Sunday Pub tomorrow. All of you on screen are invited to join me on screen if you would like. And pretty much anybody else who wants to join. That's the whole idea of the Sunday Pub. And otherwise, see you all later. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
All right.